At my wedding reception in Charleston, I noticed my father-in-law, Marcus Whitmore, slip something into my champagne when he thought no one was looking. And I didn't panic or call it out because 6 months earlier, he'd quietly offered me 50 grand to walk away from his son and said problems in his family don't get fixed, they disappear. So instead, I smiled, waited for the toast, and when he turned to greet someone behind him, I switched our glasses, and as he lifted the drink meant for me and thanked everyone for welcoming me into the family, he had no idea he was about to swallow the same secret he'd prepared for me. And right then, while the room clapped and the band kept playing, I realized this wasn't actually my wedding night at all. It was the moment his perfect reputation started to crack. I didn't react when Marcus drank it. That's the first thing people always ask me later. Why didn't you say anything? But the truth is, I was too busy watching him. Not dramatically, not like in a movie, just watching. The way you watch someone when you're waiting to see if you imagined something or if it's actually happening. He lowered the glass, swallowed once, then twice, and for a second, nothing changed. He still looked like himself, relaxed shoulders, polite smile, one hand resting lightly against the table like he owned not just the room, but the air inside it. Around us, the reception kept moving, silverware clinking, someone laughing too loud near the bar, my cousin asking a waiter if the crab cakes were gone already. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. And that was the strange part, because standing 3 feet away from me was a man who, if I was right, had just tried to poison me, and the world hadn't noticed. I kept my expression steady and picked at the edge of my napkin so my hands would have something to do. 6 months earlier, he'd sat across from me at a quiet steakhouse and slid an envelope across the table like it was a business proposal, not a bribe. $50,000. That was his opening offer. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten me outright. He just explained, very calmly, that his family valued privacy and that certain situations were handled internally. I remember thinking he sounded less like an angry father and more like a man used to problems disappearing on schedule. At the time, I told myself he was bluffing. Rich men liked control. That didn't make them dangerous. I actually laughed when I left that lunch. I'm not laughing now. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks and glanced around the room, nodding politely to relatives, accepting congratulations like he was the host instead of the father of the groom. If he felt anything, he hid it well. But then I noticed a small thing, the kind of detail you'd miss if you weren't already paying attention. His jaw tightened, just slightly, like he'd tasted something bitter he hadn't expected. He lowered the glass, swallowed a second time, then his fingers shifted on the stem of the glass before he set it down. Beside me, my husband Daniel leaned close and whispered, "You okay? You look kind of pale." I smiled at him automatically and nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. My focus was still on Marcus, on the tiny delay between his movements, on the way he rolled his shoulders like his jacket fit wrong. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I'd been wrong about the glass. Maybe this was all in my head. But then he took a breath, careful, measured, and I knew. Not what he'd put in the drink, not how this would end, just one thing. Something was starting. The first real sign wasn't dramatic. No collapse, no choking, nothing anyone else would notice unless they were already looking for it. It was hesitation. Marcus reached for the back of his chair like he meant to pull it out, then stopped halfway, fingers resting on the wood as if he'd forgotten why his hand was there. He blinked once, slow, then straightened again, smoothing his jacket front with that same practiced composure I'd seen at every family dinner. If you didn't know him, you'd think nothing of it. If you did know him, you'd still think nothing of it. Marcus Whitmore didn't do visible discomfort. He didn't do uncertainty. He definitely didn't do weakness. But I was watching for cracks. A waiter passed between us carrying a tray of fresh glasses, and for a second his eyes followed the movement a little too carefully, like he was steadying himself using something outside his own body. Then his gaze snapped back to the room and smiled at someone across the dance floor. Too quick, too precise, like he put the smile on manually. Daniel was still beside me, still relaxed, still living inside a completely different version of the same moment. He squeezed my hand lightly and went back to watching his cousin tell some long story with exaggerated gestures. I remember thinking how strange it was that two people could stand shoulder to shoulder and exist in separate realities. In his world, his father was fine. In mine, his father was calculating how not to fall over. Marcus cleared his throat. Soft, controlled. He picked up his water glass this time, not the champagne, and took a careful sip. His hand looked steady, but he didn't put the glass down right away. He held it there, fingers tight around it, like he needed the contact. Then came another pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. Long enough. His wife noticed something then. I saw it in the way her smile faltered before she walked towards him, heels clicking faster than before. She touched his arm and said something quietly. He answered immediately, too immediately, and gave a small, dismissive shake of his head. Whatever he said made her nod, but she didn't step away. She stayed close, close enough to catch him if she had to. That's when I knew she saw it too. A bead of sweat showed near his temple. Just one. It slid down slowly, disappearing into the line of his sideburn. Marcus Whitmore did not sweat indoors. Not ever. The detail felt louder than the music. He shifted his weight. His shoe dragged slightly against the floor. Not a stumble, not even a misstep, just friction where there shouldn't have been any. And that's when the certainty settled in my chest, heavy and cold and steady. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know why. The sound that finally pulled everyone's attention wasn't loud. It was small, sharp, and completely ordinary. Glass touching wood. Marcus's champagne flute tipped against the table as his fingers loosened, not dropping it, just letting it lean at an angle that didn't look intentional. A few heads turned automatically, the way people do when something shifts in their peripheral vision. Conversations didn't stop, not yet, but they softened like the room itself was lowering its voice to listen. Marcus straightened fast, almost correcting the moment before it existed. He pressed his palm flat on the tablecloth and gave a short laugh that didn't match his eyes. "Excuse me," he said, smooth but thin, the words sliding out a fraction too carefully. Up close, I could see it now, the tightness around his mouth, the focus it took for him to stand perfectly upright. Control, still there, but working harder than it should have been. Daniel noticed the glass. "Dad," he said, half smiling, half confused. "You good?" Marcus nodded once. Quick. "Of course." He cleared his throat again, softer this time, like even that small effort cost something. Just stood up too fast. It might have worked if he'd sat back down, if he'd laughed it off, if he'd done anything normal. But Marcus didn't sit. He stayed standing like pride had locked his knees in place. His wife's hand hovered near his elbow now, not touching, just ready. She kept smiling at the nearest guests, but her eyes never left his face. Another second passed. Then his composure slipped. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone to gasp, just enough. His shoulders tightened, his breath shortened, and his gaze, that confident, assessing gaze he used on everyone, shifted and landed on me. Right on me. At first, there was irritation there, like he thought I'd done something socially unacceptable. Then confusion. Then something sharper. His pupils focused, searching my face, replaying the last few minutes in his head. You could almost see the calculation happening behind his eyes, pieces moving, rearranging, refusing to fit. And then it clicked. Recognition doesn't always look explosive. Sometimes it looks quiet, heavy, final. Marcus's expression changed in a way I don't think anyone else in that room understood, but I did, because I'd seen that exact moment once before in my life. The instant someone realizes they misjudged the one variable they thought they controlled. He knew. Not everything, not the details, but enough. His fingers curled slightly against the tablecloth, knuckles paling. The room was starting to notice now, not the cause, just the shift. Nearby conversation slowed. A chair scraped softly. Someone whispered, "Is he all right?" I didn't step forward. I didn't speak. I just held his gaze. And in that silence, his certainty drained away. That was the real turning point. Not the drink, not the symptoms. That look. Because men like Marcus don't fear consequences. They fear witnesses. If you want to see what happened in the next 60 seconds, the part no one in that room was ready for, stay with me, because the moment he lost control was only the beginning.
For a few seconds, nothing happened. That was the strangest part. Marcus stood there, gripping the table, staring at me like he was waiting for the world to correct itself, like reality had made a mistake and just needed a moment to fix it. Around us, the reception kept breathing. Glasses clinked, someone laughed uncertainly, a chair shifted. But it all sounded farther away now, like the room had taken a step back from him without realizing it. "Marcus?" his wife said quietly. He didn't answer. His eyes were still locked on mine, searching, accusing, recalculating. I could almost see the exact second the last possibility disappeared from his mind. The second he understood this wasn't random, this wasn't illness, this wasn't bad timing. This was consequence. His mouth opened slightly, like he was about to speak, but whatever he meant to say didn't come out. Instead, his hand slipped on the tablecloth, fingers tightening too late to stop it. The glass tipped. This time, it didn't catch. It fell. The sound of it shattering on the floor cut straight through the music. Now the room noticed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Someone near the bar said, "Whoa," under their breath. Daniel stepped forward fast, catching his father's arm just as Marcus's knees bent slightly. Not collapsing, just failing to hold confidence anymore. "Dad, hey, sit down," Daniel said, voice tight with confusion. Marcus didn't sit. He tried to pull his arm free instead. Not hard, just stubborn. "I'm fine," he said, but the words dragged, heavy and uneven. He glanced at me again, and this time there was no arrogance left in his face, only one question. How? I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because people were watching now. A cluster of relatives stood halfway out of their chairs. A server whispered something urgent to the coordinator. Someone's phone was already halfway raised, not recording yet, just hovering in that instinctive way people have when they sense something important is unfolding. Marcus followed their eyes. He saw them seeing him. And that, more than anything, is what broke him. Not physically, socially. His shoulders lowered a fraction, his jaw loosened. The performance dropped. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked like a man who understood he wasn't the most powerful person in the room anymore. Daniel looked between us, confused. "What's going on?" I held his gaze gently. "Your dad should probably get some air." Marcus's eyes snapped back to me. He knew I knew, and he knew I knew he knew. It was over. Not with a confession, not with a scene, just with silence and witnesses. Staff hurried forward. His wife started insisting it was dehydration. Someone mentioned calling a medic. The band had stopped playing entirely now, instruments hanging in uncertain quiet. I stepped back beside Daniel, slipping my hand into his. My pulse was steady, my breathing calm. Because the truth was, the victory didn't come from revenge. It came from exposure. Marcus Whitmore hadn't lost control because of what he drank. He lost it because people saw him lose it. And men like him survive on the illusion that no one ever will. If you want to hear what Daniel asked me later that night, the question that almost unraveled everything again, stay with me. Because sometimes the real ending doesn't happen in the room, it happens after everyone leaves. The last guests didn't leave until almost midnight. By then, the ballroom looked like every wedding does after it's over. Half-empty glasses, chairs pushed back at odd angles, flower petals stuck to the floor where someone had stepped on them and kept walking. The adrenaline had worn off, the noise was gone, and all that was left was that quiet, honest kind of silence you only get when something important has already happened. Daniel and I were outside near the valet stand when he finally asked.
He didn't look angry. He looked careful. "What happened back there?" he said. Not "what's wrong with my dad," not "why were you staring at him," just that. I watched a car pulled up to the curb, headlights washing across the pavement, and for a second I considered lying. Not a big lie, just a soft one, something that would smooth the night over and let everyone keep their version of the story. But lies are the reason men like Marcus get as far as they do. So I told him the truth. Not dramatically, not at once, just the facts, plain and steady. The lunch 6 months ago, the envelope, the offer, the warning, the glass. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't defend him. He didn't even look surprised, not exactly. He just listened, eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder, like he was replaying memories and quietly rearranging them. When I finished, he nodded once. That was it. No shouting, no denial, just understanding settling in. After a minute, he said, "I always wondered why he didn't like you." It wasn't an accusation, it was a realization. Inside, through the tall windows, I could see staff clearing the last table. Marcus wasn't there anymore. Someone had taken him home earlier, surrounded by concerned voices and polite explanations. By morning, I knew, there would be a neat version of the story ready for anyone who asked. Something harmless, something forgettable. But Daniel had seen him, and that meant the illusion was gone where it mattered. He reached for my hand again, lacing his fingers through mine like he had during the ceremony, and this time when he squeezed, it felt different, not reassuring, decided. That's when I understood something I don't think I would have believed before that night. Power doesn't disappear when someone fights it. It disappears when someone sees it. Marcus hadn't lost because of what was in the glass. He lost because for the first time in his life, someone watched him closely enough to notice. And once that happens, men like him don't get their old lives back. If you stayed all the way to the end, you already know this wasn't really a wedding story. It was a moment of truth. Stick with me for the next one, because the stories people try hardest to hide are always the ones worth hearing.